I did get the longest presentation title in the world for 15 minutes, which is The Future of Social Housing Providers and Relationship with Voluntary Community and Social Enterprise Sector and Role in the Wider Community, which in 15 minutes is just about impossible, I think. What I'm going to try and do, sorry, thanks man, is just give you some background, and there's a lot of numbers in this, but I just want to do that from a contextual point of view. Then give a bit of a personal view, then talk about some of the challenges and opportunities. And it's interesting, just listening to that introduction, hearing the things that are being talked about in terms of early help hub, social prescribing, are all things that resonate because either we're involved or being taken part in a lot of these things. And I think it almost goes unsaid, but needs to be recognised that a lot of the work that goes on, particularly for place-based housing organisations, is absolutely entwined with the voluntary sector, but often we don't recognise that, and often the voluntary sector may not realise that the housing providers are people to go and work with or work through or take the opportunities to partner with, and I think we just need to think about that. And then some reflections, hopefully, to help stimulate a debate. So, lots of numbers, and these are at a GM level, because I thought, although this is Manchester, and I think, as has been said in the introduction, we are going to be forever part of GM, I think it feels like, going forward. So you may as well look at it from that broader context. And the Greater Manchester housing providers have been working together now for probably the best part of 2-3 years in terms of trying to come together to help influence that broader combined authority agenda and work with partners around that. And I think it has been quite constructive and helpful. But from a Greater Manchester point of view, you can see we've got the best part of 250,000 homes. 1 in 5 homes in the city region are owned or managed by housing providers. That's housing associations, transfer organisations, ALMOs, whatever you want to call it, but that's what they are. And we house somewhere over 500,000 people. And if you could see the bottom bit, which is obscured, you'd see that we've got £72 million worth of inward investment in 15-16 across Greater Manchester. So they're not insignificant financial numbers. We've invested 1.6 million in apprenticeships in 15-16, which is absolutely essential, because wherever we go in terms of this, the core business of housing is crucial, but impacting on the skills and work agenda are going to be as vital in providing those routes out of poverty. And it's interesting to hear poverty mentioned, because I'll come back to that in a bit. 28,000 full-time jobs across local communities, and for example in Wythenshawe, over 45% of our 550 colleagues live in Wythenshawe. So you've got a direct impact on your neighbourhood in terms of your role as an employer. And the things like paying the proper living wage to everybody, including apprenticeships, has had a dramatic effect in terms of improving the lot for a lot of people, certainly in Wythenshawe. 7,000 residents back into work across GM in 15-16. It's not our core business. It's not what we were necessarily always set up to do, but for lots of housing providers, they see that absolute necessity to help people back into work, improve their skills, all that is absolutely crucial in terms of routes forward. And housing providers have helped residents save £14 million through, and that's not property reduction. My PA said, it's your bad handwriting, so I'll cop that plea. It's poverty reduction. And that's all the things that we do in terms of, I've got crap handwriting, so she's always right, I know that now. But we do all the work in terms of welfare, debt advice, counselling, all the sort of things. Now, some of you will know, many of you will know, that the housing organisations had to take a rent cut a couple of years ago, which took, in our case, directly £20 million out of our business plan over 4 years. We had to save £5 million straight away, which out of a £60 million budget is a big hole. Now, some organisations decided to stop doing some of that welfare work, they stopped doing some of the resident involvement, community engagement work. What's the different hard decisions had to be made? Many of us said, no, we can't do that, because that strikes at the very heart of it. But those are long discussions into the night for lots of boards and committees and staff teams. But again, it's part of the reality check, because as we say about cuts, you can only cut so far without things falling off the edge, and it just feels like quite often things have been challenged. built 8,000 homes in Greater Manchester over the last 5 years, and that's 33% of all new homes. So when we hear, not to be quite political anywhere, the current government blather on about the need for building new homes and how the private sector is essential, etc., etc., at the end of the day, through the crash, beyond the crash, it's the housing associations who are the most consistent providers of new homes across the country. They continue to do that, and they will continue to do that. Our challenge, as I'll come back to, is because of this massive focus on growth and on new build and on providing new homes, and at least now the government have backed off from the Cameron-Osborne axis of the only new home that's good is one that's been bought or somebody owns. At least this lot have now decided that they can talk again about affordability and rented. It's not a dirty word. We've still got a debate to be won across GM in terms of what that will look like. And interesting, as was said earlier, in terms of the mayoral position, I've been part of a couple of meetings with Sean and with Andy Burnham, and that's going to be one of it's certainly a live agenda for them, and it's going to be a live agenda going forward, is what is the balance of new provision? Because from a local authority point of view, not to be too stark, building more expensive homes delivers more council tax, and they're all under pressure. So there's going to be a tension going forward in terms of what that new supply looks like. And in Manchester, the view is we've got enough affordable rented homes. We don't need a new supply of that. We need different routes for people to have home ownership. And again, there'll be a tension there. We've spent 442 million maintaining homes in Greater Manchester and supporting local businesses. So that's year on year what we have to spend to maintain and keep our homes up to a decent standard. It's a big number in terms of that going out each year. The combined annual turnover is £1 billion with assets worth over £6 billion. So, it's easy to look at some small housing associations and think, well, they're not very big organisations, but when you combine it, we are big businesses at the end of the day. We try and behave appropriately, most of us, and we try and behave sensitively, but these are big numbers, and there are now a big debate going forward in terms of what that'll feel and look like across the country. And what I wanted to do in terms of this is touch on that now, because the balance of growth and place has been a debate. I've been in housing over 30 years, and it's always been there. What are we about? Are we about building more houses, about developing more homes, or are we about managing the place where we are and helping people, whether that's through employment, through skills, through apprenticeships, through health, through education, all the different things that people will be engaged in? And that's a debate that will be live, because you'll read lots in the press, you'll see lots in the press, you'll see lots of very large national housing organisations with lots of surpluses going, well, we're going to build 2,000 homes next year. Well, is that what they should be doing with all their surplus? Because you've got to remember, at the end of the day, most housing organisations' financing and their financial position came from the public investment in them. There was a lovely time long ago when the government gave us all the money that was needed to build a new house, 100% grant. Happy days. You wanted to build a house, you got the land, they gave you all the money for it, you got the rental stream. Happy days. So if you were a traditional housing association set up in the 1960s and you were getting 100% grant, you built a massive asset base against what was 100% public subsidy. And now, of course, your grant rate, you're lucky if you're getting 25 to 30%, and the rest you've got to borrow from the markets and pay back as a mortgage effectively. But all those organisations that are reporting surpluses in the millions and millions, forget that's been funded on the back of the public purse. So the tension for the government is saying, when you hear them use phrases like sweating your assets, basically what they're saying is, you've taken the public pound, now we want you to use that for the benefit of what it's meant to be in terms of providing new homes. And that's going to be an interesting debate for some. And I think for me, it's about who do we serve? What are we here for? I was always very clear when I got involved in housing, whether it was in local authorities and housing associations, we were here to help people who couldn't or were disadvantaged in different ways, who needed support to get into housing that was affordable, that was decent, that was well maintained, well looked after, and we could provide them with a range of other services. And I think there are times when some housing organisations forget that and just become another property developer, and I think that's regrettable. We need joined up solutions in what are challenging times. And joined up solutions mean working with yourselves at the ground level, with our colleagues in whatever projects they are, whether that's about food poverty, fuel poverty, whatever else it is. It's how we can work collaboratively to use our resources more effectively. And there's lots of really good examples across Manchester, across Greater Manchester and across the country where voluntary sector organisations working with housing partners are making a difference in their communities. And I think we don't necessarily champion those enough, and we need to think about how we do that better. We have become a backstop for local service withdrawal. I started working in Manchester just over 11 years ago. At that time, Manchester basically funded, it felt like, everything. And they controlled pretty much everything. And with a pretty steel hand in a steel glove, it felt like at times. And of course, the cuts then meant they had to gradually back away. And I think the only upside of that, in some ways, has been a much better development of a collaborative approach rather than what was a very sort of, it felt at times, a very directional approach. But it does mean that things have stopped happening that used to happen. And quite often it feels, certainly at a local level, that we are the organisation probably with the biggest budget to try and bridge those gaps. And that is a challenge because we can't pay for everything. And there is a time when it just can't happen. But we need to make sure we're using our local pound to the best advantage, and that, I think, means more work with organisations such as yours at a local level. There's going to be, and will always be, a big debate between is big best or is small best. In a very simple terms, it's not that simple, but when we see organisations in housing merging together to create super groups, whether that's regionally, across the city or nationally, you do have to wonder why sometimes, and I think that's the argument that needs to be made. In Wythenshawe, we brought together Willow Park and Parkway Green, which was two transfer organisations from the council, because we'd been artificially split as such by a motorway, and the council phased it in two. Now, there's a very good economic argument for that, because that meant we got more government grant money to fund Parkway Green. I'm not going to argue with that. We've got 50-odd million of gap funding we wouldn't have got had they just backed it into Willow Park. We always felt and worked towards bringing the two businesses together, which we did do 3 years ago. That gave us a dividend through savings of something like £4 million we've been able to reinvest back into the community, both through new homes and services, and helped hedge against the cuts that we never predicted were going to come out of the rent cut. It just meant we didn't have to make as much savings as we might have done, and that is a benefit. And there's a rationale to that. I do wonder sometimes whether some of the group structures and mergers have a rationale that's real. There's going to be, and will always be, a question about what's affordable. Is 8% of the market as a rent affordable? What is the affordable rent? And is a shared ownership home affordable if the interest rates go up? Poverty is being hidden. Nobody really wants to talk about it. You'll all be able to talk about it knowingly and with experience, but when I go into a lot of forums, if you say poverty, people don't want to talk about it, and I think it's appalling. I see and talk to our tenants and residents and to my colleagues who are dealing with it day in, day out, people who've got no food in the house, who've been sanctioned, who are desperate, and I look at how many food parcels are being delivered, work that's going through Tree of Life and other local groups. It is not getting any easier, it's getting tougher. And the sanctions bite hard and deep. And again, we do not seem to want to ever get into a conversation about what the impact of that is. It's always about avoiding it, I think. Challenges and opportunities. I think we don't want to compete for the same resources. There's a madness to it, and I know it's difficult, and I know the available pot of money gets smaller, and we all try and put our hand into it, and it's about how we can do that in a more collaborative way. Not being naive. We've all got to keep our businesses running. We've all got to keep our organisations running the best way we can. We want to invest in staff training and all those sort of things. So it's how can we think about it a bit more smart. Political pressures are never going to go away. We're blessed in some senses in Manchester. There's a very stable political platform. You know, I used to work in Birmingham. I used to work in Stoke-on-Trent, and you know, Birmingham's carnage at the moment, and we are blessed with that. And at a GM level, again, there is a level of sensibilities in terms of it. But the external political pressures, whether that's whatever they may look like, are going to come, and we just need to think about what that looks like. And there is a real push for growth at all costs, whether that's economic, which makes sense. We do need to create the jobs and the opportunities for people. I do worry that there are communities across our city who are potentially going to be further away from that growth and become more isolated and more marginalised, and I have a real fear for that, in the same way that if we have an affordable housing strategy that says we don't need new supply and we're only going to build bigger houses that are more expensive, then what we're saying to people who can't bridge that, you only live in the poor areas. All right, we'll just have ghettos then. I mean, that's extreme, but there is a real danger that if we don't have a mixed approach, we will face some of those challenges. Ageing population, living longer, less turnover, less houses available. Very simply, we've seen something nearly a 2% drop in the number of people leaving our homes in the last year. That means probably somewhere in the region of 150 to 175 houses that we normally have re-let have not become available, which means people staying on the waiting list longer. You see more people leave to go back home when they're leaving, which basically is code for I can't afford it, I'm just going back to stay on the city, or I'm going back in to stay with friends because I'm struggling. There's a real problem there, and again we're masking it, and I think there's a real danger across the city that supply thing is going to really hurt. We know about the rise in rough sleeping and homelessness. That has got some currency in terms of people's conversation, and it's directly linked to all these other things. And it'll be as frustrating for you as it is for everybody else that people want to talk about it as, oh, it's people sleeping on. No, there's a rationale why that isn't there. If they take the support services away, if you stop supported housing, if you stopped all that, what people need to make that work, then it's a consequence. And I think we have got more people in food, fuel and furniture poverty. I talk about furniture poverty because in another role, I'm chair of Furniture Resource Centre in Liverpool, social enterprise that has been dealing with this since the 70s. And the rise of Bright House and Perfect Home is another dark mark on our economy, really, because anybody that goes or knows the approach of these weekly pay shops to the 5,000 APR rate, it's just awful. And it's no coincidence that in Wythenshawe Civic Centre you've got both Perfect Home and Bright House and another provider similar, basically leeching off the back of poor people and their desire to have something that's new. And the only upside was I was at a meeting on Friday in Liverpool, and Bright House, following some work by the FSA, are now struggling and had to close 30 shops. Government has softened its line on ownership. That's to be welcome. I think there was a pragmatic reality check for them in that the private sector was not going to come to the rescue. They were not going to deliver 1 million homes for ownership. Presto, Theresa woke up, and the rest of them are catching up. The local housing allowance cap and supported housing is a critical issue. They've kicked it down the road. It's too hard. We'll kick it down the road. It's not going away. New schemes are not being started because of the fear of it. Schemes are at risk because of it, and housing organisations are having to try and bridge it where we can. But it's a classic, well, let's kick it down the road. Oh, there's a general election. Let's not think about it in the same way that our next rent settlement, is it going to be another cut or is it not, will arrive at about the same time. Homelessness and rough sleeping has got attention, but are we really tackling it? And there's a strong spirit of collaboration, I think, and I see this particularly in Manchester and across Greater Manchester. There is an opportunity, both from housing providers, voluntary sector, social enterprise sector. We do need to think about how we can work smarter and stronger together where it's appropriate and where we can. The mayoral election does provide us with a really good focus for things, and I think we should take advantage of that and lobby and put it firmly on their agenda. And certainly for conversations I've been part of with Sean and with Andy Burnham, they are listening, and they do want to listen. They do understand. They don't want to be part of something that doesn't work. 15 minutes isn't long enough. I could drone on for longer, but I can see you glazing over, so I will shut up. We must keep our voice. Your voice is very strong. Housing providers need to make sure we're aligned with that. Whether we're demonstrating about whatever, we need to keep our voices live and active. If the housing organisation spent more time talking about the issues than giving each other awards, it'd be a lot better place. I despair the amount of Twitterdom about people telling each other how fantastic it is their chief exec is in the 50 most influential people in the country. If there's only 50 people voting for it, it doesn't matter, really. Whilst the world around us is chaotic, and it is, you wouldn't have predicted this a year ago. When I was laying in a hospital bed, I didn't envisage Brexit and I didn't envisage Donald, and in my worst nightmares I wouldn't have done that. But, you know, I've been saying to colleagues, we just have to carry on. We really just have to carry on, and we just have to remember that there are a lot of our tenants and residents and community members who are suffering, and they are really suffering, and we just have to keep alive to that. I think we have to invest wisely. We have to invest with a social return. We shouldn't be spending money if it's not going to make a difference, if it's not going to have real value, and I think that's part of our challenge. I chaired a meeting of the GM providers last week looking at social value and how we capture, how we purchase to make sure we're delivering that, and I think there's a real spirit of wanting to do more on that, and again, I think that's something we can collaborate on. We should be accountable, and I think quite often housing organisations are not really held to account strongly enough, particularly by their local communities, and we have to work at that. But my bottom line message is collaboration is key, and I think you have an open door at our places, so please knock on. Thank you.